This educational video is a public service by the Ohio Department of Higher Education, the Ohio Cyber Range Institute, and the University of Dayton Center for Cybersecurity and Data Intelligence. Learn more about this and other cybersecurity topics at the Ohio Cyber Range Institute and the University of Dayton Center for Cybersecurity and Data Intelligence.
Hi, I'm James Robinson. I'm a professor in the Department of Communication, and I work with the Center for Cybersecurity and Data Intelligence at the University of Dayton. Today, I'd like to talk about ransomware, and I want to identify some things that I think that you need to know about ransomware. In 2021, there was a survey conducted of 600 healthcare organizations, and they found that 42% of those organizations faced 2 or more ransomware attacks in the previous 2 years. 71% of those organizations had patient stays increase because of cyber attacks. 65% had patients diverted to other facilities because of ransomware attacks. 36% of the organizations indicated that patient complications were caused by ransomware attacks. 20% of those organizations indicated that patient mortality increased because of ransomware attacks. So you can see that this ransomware, these ransomware attacks are an incredible problem for healthcare facilities. But it's not just a problem for healthcare facilities. Other infrastructure organizations also have comparable kinds of problems. In 2021, the Colonial Pipeline attack was perpetrated allegedly by a Russian cybercrime group called DarkSide. And in that, the ransomware attack resulted in them not being able to ship pipe oil to the East Coast. And so to restore their ability to sell oil, Colonial paid $4.4 million in Bitcoin. Interestingly enough, the Department of Justice managed to recover half of that ransom. They found a certain number of Bitcoins. I can't remember the number, but they found a number of Bitcoins and were able to reduce the price down to about $2 million. But unfortunately, the $2 million is really the least of the problems for Colonial, because their costs for restoring their system is going to be in the tens of millions of dollars. So what can you do as an individual to protect yourself against ransomware? One of the things that you can do, and probably the single most important thing that you can do, is you need to patch and update your software. You know, if you run a Windows box, you know that there's a way that you can have whenever Microsoft offers patches, that they can your computer can automatically update and make those changes for you. And you should most definitely be running the automatic updates on that stuff. You have to do it automatically because you need to have those patches and those repairs done as soon as possible, because once they become well known or whatever, you're incredibly vulnerable to attack. One of the most devastating ransomware attacks is called WannaCry, and interestingly enough, it's starting to come back because people don't update and patch their systems. In fact, in the middle of this terrible ransomware attack, the problem was that once the patch was available, lots and lots of organizations and individuals didn't update and didn't patch their systems, and so they were still susceptible to attack. You need to know that hackers rely on known vulnerabilities. In other words, if someone's going to engage in a ransomware attack, they're likely to need to know, or they want to know, what vulnerabilities are going to be found on a particular system so that they can attack that system in a way that'll be successful. And so then as soon as those vulnerabilities become public or known, the software engineers begin developing solutions to solve those problems or bugs. In short, nothing is more important than patching your software. Patching and updating is much more difficult in a business environment than it is in an individual environment. You can do this very, very simply. Problem is that organizations and businesses, they have machines and they have software that they can't upgrade, and they can't update their operating system easily because the software is out of date and it's no longer being tended to by the original producer of that software. So you as an individual can almost always use automatic updates. Businesses and organizations have more trouble because they have systems that are not up to date. Another thing that you can do to protect yourself against ransomware is you can avoid operating your computer from an account with administrative rights. You may know that computers have two general categories of accounts. We have administrative accounts and we have standard accounts. In an administrative account, you can do anything that can be done on the computer. You can save and delete and hide files. You can install software. You can format a hard drive. You can add hardware. You can delete hardware. So anything that you want to do on your computer, you can do from an administrative account. A standard account, on the other hand, sometimes called a guest account, sometimes called a local account, although all of those are actually three different things, they're much more restrictive. And so if you have a standard account and you don't have permissions to say delete a file or hide a file or install software or whatever it is, then if you were to be attacked in a ransomware attack, there's a possibility. It's not a great possibility, but it increases your chances, reduces your chances of being infected by a ransomware attack because the malware will not execute in a standard file. So that's one of the ways that you can protect yourself. You should avoid using the administrator account if you're not doing something where you need those kinds of permissions and rights. Using that account can help you avoid a self-inflicted disaster. You can't make the same magnitude of enormous mistake in a guest account or in a local account or a standard account as you can in an administrative account. And of course, you should never give anyone else the rights to destroy files on your computer, right? And so when we say that, what do we mean? We mean if you're going to allow somebody else to use your computer, you need to make sure that they're operating from a standard account and don't have the ability to damage the software on your computer. They may not be trying to do that. No one's suggesting here that someone is going to be trying to do damage to your system, but if they're trying to download something or if they're trying to make a change for whatever reason that they need to play a game, for example, there's a chance that if they have the authority or the permissions to make those changes, that they can do significant damage to your computer. Another thing that you need to do is you need to in your efforts to defend yourself against ransomware is you need to back yourself up. You need to back up your files. And the gold standard for backup is called the 3-2-1 backup system. And you can see here it's pretty simple. What you want to do is you always want to have 3 copies of your data. So one will be a production copy. If you're working in Microsoft Word and you're writing a term paper or an article or a report, that copy that you're working on, that's your production copy. So you have your production copy, and then you have 2 backup copies. So that you have to have 2 additional copies. One of those backup copies has to be on a different media type than your computer. So maybe you'll use a USB thumb drive. The second backup copy has to be on a different backup media. So, for example, that might be on a Box account or an online account of some kind, Box or Dropbox or whatever you're using. So you split those up. It doesn't make that much difference what you do, but you want to make sure that you have them split into 2 different media types in case you have some kind of a failure with that technology. And the third element of this is that one of your copies, one of these 2 copies, in this case the USB drive, needs to be off-site. Although this is also off-site, the beauty of this in the good old days was that if you leave the copies in the same place that your production copy is, any kind of natural disaster would result in you not having that backup anymore. A fire, a flood, a tornado, those kinds of things. So the goal here is to have 3 copies in at least 2 different medias and at least one of them off-site so that you're relatively safe from natural disaster. The fourth thing that I want to talk about is imaging or cloning your hard drive. People don't talk about this very much. I'm a huge fan of imaging and cloning your hard drive. When you talk about imaging or cloning a hard drive, what you're saying is is not just making a copy of the files on it. You're literally making a digital copy identical to the hard drive that's on your computer. You're making a copy of that and then putting it somewhere safe so that if something happens to that hard drive, you can actually and literally take the other hard drive out, put the new hard drive in, and you're right exactly back up to where you were when you made that digital copy or you cloned your hard drive. So what people will tell you, and the rule of thumb is always, just make sure your files are backed up. And that's good advice. And that was even better advice back in the day when hard drive, the cost of space on hard drive or the size of the hard drive was an issue. Now you can buy a hard drive that's incredibly enormous for relatively no money. For $50 or $60, you can't fill the hard drive that you can buy for that amount of money, now unless you're keeping copies of movies. And so then if you make a complete copy of that, then what you can do is again, it's not just that your files have been restored, but it's that all of your applications are also restored. And so they'll save your boot record, your files, your settings, your preferences, your themes, so you will not be able to tell that you're operating off this cloned image of a drive instead of the actual original drive. The last thing I want to say about protecting yourself against ransomware is that, you probably should be encrypting your files. And so, when we say encrypt your files, we're offering you another way to protect yourself against ransomware. And the reason that this has become such an important issue is because hackers adapt their strategies in ransomware attacks. In the original ransomware attack, basically all that happened was that your files were sitting on your computer and they became encrypted by the bad guys. And so then you had to buy the decryption to get your files back. In ransomware 2 attacks, the hackers actually make copies of your files before they encrypt them. And so now the bad guys have copies of the files, legitimate, easily readable, and transferable files. They have copies of those things that they can use to either leak to post on the internet or leak to somebody, a competitor perhaps. But then now we also have ransomware 3 attacks. And in a ransomware 3 attack, you get leaked files and you get a DDoS attack. So it becomes important to consider, encrypting your files because, again, in these even more sophisticated attacks, they're still going to be able to leak those files to people that you don't want to see them. And they're also going to be inconveniencing you in terms of trying to take down your server or your web page or whatever it is. They're going to be doing that with that DDoS attack. And so you want to make sure that the files that you have that are leaked, if they're going to try to leak them to somebody else, that they're encrypted so that if they do leak them, if they do send them, if they do post them, nobody will be able to read them. And then, of course, we've got ransomware 4 attacks. And so in a ransomware 4 attack, what happens is that they not only leak the files and perform a DDoS or a distributed denial of service attack, but they also use those files and send the leaked files to customers and clients as a way of harassing them. So, for example, if you were a psychologist, let's say, and they get their systems hacked or whatever it is, not only can they post those files on the internet so that people can see, files that should be covered by privacy laws, they also can take those files and they can literally send them to the client in the therapy session so that they can see that their privacy is being violated. And so these other ways of these additional components to ransomware attacks, it doesn't change the nature of ransomware, but what it does is it gives the cyber criminal extra leverage for motivating people to pay the ransom. I've got one final reason that I want to talk about backing up your files. And this is not so much of a ransomware reason as it is a hardware reason. Your chances of being a victim of ransomware they're not tremendously high. Most people are not victims of ransomware attacks. That being said, we still try to do things to keep ourselves from being possibly victimized by something or whatever it is. But the thing is that you need to know is that a hard drive has a mean time between failure of about 34 years. So you buy a hard drive today, it should be good for about 34 years. That seems like a pretty good deal. That seems like a pretty safe, piece of hardware that you can rely on. So why am I saying that you should back this up as a way of protecting yourself? I'm saying it because 5% of all hard drives crash within a year and a half. So when you think about, I've got 34 years until my hard drive is going to crash, you've only, I don't know, I probably have files now almost that are getting close to 34 years old. Maybe I don't have any that are 34 yet, but I have lots of files that are a year and a half old. And so if my hard drive goes bad, and again, 95% of us are going to be totally fine, just like most of us aren't going to be victims of ransomware, but 5% of us are going to have a hard drive fail within a year and a half. So the average time to failure is a nice statistic, but I don't like to think that my new hard drive is going to fail in 18 months. I mean, that's a disaster, right? 34 years, that's one thing, that's a tragedy in and of itself. But the things that are usually most important to me as a person that uses this computer as a tool is what I'm writing right now. Most of the other stuff I could go get a copy of the journal or whatever it is that I've done it, and I can go get a copy of a lot of those kinds of things. But the things that I'm writing today, that's what I need to protect. And so that's why you need to back up your files on a regular basis. I'll give you an example. My building caught fire in 1987. Building had been there since 1865. So it was safe for 122 years. Didn't help me a bit. When it burned, I lost everything in my office. And so my point here is that when we talk about what you can do for ransomware, you need to do all these things, but this idea of backing up your hard drives, this is something that protects you from a tremendous amount of potential problems, not the least of which is ransomware and hardware failure, but also an accidental deletion of a file that you can't get back for whatever reason. These things, a power failure, those kinds of problems. So be sure to consider backing up your file and back them up on a regular basis. It'll help you in the event of a ransomware attack, but it'll also help you to keep you from falling prey to a lot of other kinds of attacks. One more thing that I want to say about backup is that when you're backing up your files, a lot of us, what we're going to do is we're going to take a USB drive or we're going to take an external hard drive and we're going to plug it into our system. And when we plug that into our system, we back up the files and we say, that's great. And then maybe we back them up again next Friday. Maybe we back them up once a week, or maybe we back them up once a month. The problem with that strategy is this. If you leave the hard drive or the thumb drive connected to your computer, if your computer does get infected with ransomware, the ransomware will travel right on over that drive. And so when you try to restore your drive from your backup, from your hard drive or from that USB drive, those files will also be encrypted and will be unavailable to you. So I say clone your hard drive, and I say clone your hard drive for this reason. When you clone your hard drive, you're ready to go 5 minutes, 10 minutes after disaster occurs. If you keep a cloned hard drive separate from your system, you can literally take the old drive out, the infected drive out, and put the new drive in, and you can be up and running and writing and have very, very recent versions of all the files that you've been creating. So in conclusion, there were 227 million ransomware attacks in 2021. Individuals need to protect themselves by patching and updating their software, avoid operating from an administrative account, backing up your files, and even imaging or cloning your hard drive. You also need to encrypt your files. Encrypting your files keeps the cyber criminals from being able to take that personal information and sending it off or using it as a point of leverage for getting people to pay their ransom. So that's all I have for you. Thank you very much for listening.